People who can make paintings and carvings as exciting as this are obviously talented people. They're the Barawan Kenyas who live far up the Tinjar River in the interior of Sarawak in Borneo. They're prosperous, well-fed people who, unlike most of their neighbors, have a society based on a kind of aristocracy. So for men like Batan, who is head of all the Barawans here, or Tama Tinjar and his cousin, life is not as hard as for many Borneans. They've got no shortage of land, and in normal years there's plenty of rice, and so they have time to devote themselves to other interests. In their case, these people are famous as artists, craftsmen, and particularly carvers of wood. They also have a tremendous reputation for hospitality, and later I was to discover that this could, on occasions, be almost overwhelming. I think the thing that struck me most forcibly when I first visited Sarawak was the wonderful collection of paintings and carvings in the Sarawak Museum. They're quite marvelous, quite different to anything I'd ever seen before, quite different, for instance, to the Negro carvings of Africa. And I decided that if we were going to make any films at all about Sarawak, then we should certainly try to make one about these carvers. And the ideal thing would be, if it could be arranged, was actually to photograph the carvers at work in their longhouses. And so with this in mind, I discussed the possibility with my friend Tom Harrison, the curator of the museum.
Well, the thing obviously for Hugh Gibb to do, the only place to do it, to get this sort of picture nowadays, alas, is at the longhouse, the big longhouse called Longjigan, inhabited by people called Barawans, who still make these things on the Tinjar River right up in the north and far inland in Sarawak. And at one time, this sort of carving was made all over Borneo, Sarawak and everywhere else. But now there are very few people left who can do it, and all the great carvers are living at Longjigan. And as you will see in this film, a whole way of life and way of thinking and a very fine sort of civilization is contained in this sort of work. And to me, as well as the interest of the film itself, I think it has even an importance, because this film is the first, and I'm afraid the last, that can ever be taken about what is a vanishing way of life and thinking.
Here is Sadi Jao Engan testing a chip of wood by smelling it. He's not sure how old he is, but he's certainly the eldest of these three wood carvers, or probably the most famous craftsman in Sarawak. The art of wood carving begins in the jungle, finding the right sort of wood with the right texture. The old hafted axe is still in use, and this is one of the first things that these craftsmen make for themselves. Years ago they learnt to smelt iron from native ore, and still to this day they forge their own metal tools. The carver, before he even starts out, knows pretty well what he intends to do. His next job is to measure up the wood. When a man like Tama Blachap Muyat sees a piece of wood, he'll already have an idea of what he wants to make. But the nature of the wood itself may change his idea. But it's no good walking through the jungle with a huge log on your shoulder. It's too heavy, it's too far, and it's far too hot. So one of the first things he has to do is to trim it down roughly to shape. One thing he doesn't need to carry is water. As he would say, he cuts the water from the jungle. This vine provides him with a long, cool, refreshing drink. His son does the heavy job of carrying the log, and now to find the nearest river creek to bring it back to the longhouse, where the carving will continue. washes off the traces of jungle mud. Mud. There's mud everywhere along this river. Mud, heat, and sandflies. They're the most infuriating pest. It's in the longhouse that the rest of the wood carving is done, among about 100 other people, all of whom live under this one roof. Even the massive ironwood posts on which the longhouse is supported for a length of, well, I suppose nearly 100 yards, they're carved. Almost everything's carved in and around the longhouse. These people can't bear to leave a plain wooden surface. Their instinct is to decorate it and make some kind of design. At this time of the year, after the rice harvest is in, all over the longhouse there are families working in wood. Muyat is hard at work on his special piece of wood. It's astonishing, his assurance. He never hesitates, and he never makes a mistake. In his mind's eye, he sees exactly what the finished carving will be. And in this case, it's going to be a standing woman with a dog under her arm and a small child at her feet. Carving's only one thing. The children learn to play instruments almost as soon as they can walk. The oldest carver is now almost blind, although to watch him you'd never think so. But he's so much knowledge stored in his fingertips that being blind hardly matters. His hat is the skin of a clouded leopard, and through his ears are the carved red prongs from the beak of a hornbill. A lot of careful attention is paid to the carving of the head. One of the conventions of the carvers is to make the eyes very big, far larger than their own eyes. And in order to accentuate this, the cheeks are hollowed very deep. The result is not only that the eyes stand out prominently, but the mouth is thrown into high relief as well. There's no attempt to give these faces any expression, in the ordinary sense of the word. The faces aren't symbolical of any human emotion, like fear, or dread, or humor, or greed. There's no hint of these faces being a portrait of any particular person. They're quite simply a woman, or a child, or a dog, or a monkey, just in the way that these Burawan artists choose to see them. Exactly how you represent a face, or anything else for that matter, is the business of the individual artist. As I've said before, there is one convention that they always do observe, and that is to make the eyes enormous. I asked these carvers when they started to learn their craft, and one of them told me that he began before he even began to wear clothes, which I suppose would be at about 6 years of age. And I asked Tama Muyat how many carvings he'd made in his whole life, and he just laughed. He doesn't even know how old he is. Though they use different sorts of tools, there's nothing very special about them. They're the same tools that can be used for all sorts of other purposes around the longhouse. For instance, for shaving. The old carver usually talks to himself as he's working, but sometimes, as a kind of break, he picks up his nose flute. The women never carve wood. They specialize in other forms of decorations, particularly working with beads for hats. A very elaborate bead center. It probably took her about a month to make it. And now she sews it onto a big sun hat, which she'll wear as an everyday matter, traveling on the river or at work in the rice fields. These wooden plugs are put through holes pierced in the lobes of the ears of every girl when she's still a baby. The hats are worn for two purposes. First of all, they stop evil spirits getting through the top of your head into your skull. And secondly, they keep off the sun. And these Kenya women pride themselves on their pale skins, and they do everything they possibly can to prevent themselves getting sunburnt. The patterns have a meaning. All these sort of spiral designs of animals and monsters and strange human figures are all part of the imagery connected with the spirits that are believed to abound everywhere. The beads are of beautiful colors: orange, yellow, black, white, green, and a deep blue. These designs aren't confined to hats. They are, for instance, found painted on the sides of rice huts in the fields. The familiar figures of dogs, crocodiles, and scorpions become almost unrecognizable after they've been elaborated by these artists. The painting is done in a curious way. It's done in the negative. They don't draw the figures that you see, but they block out the background so as to throw the figures into relief. Here's the kind of painting you'll find on the main interior wall of a longhouse. This is a sort of super monster that is painted if there's an epidemic or a serious drought or some other disaster, and this monster will drive away any other evil spirits that come into the area. If they need a plate for offerings, then it won't just be plain. It'll be beautifully carved out of hard wood. To keep the razor edges needed in this kind of work, they have constantly to sharpen their tools. And this presents something of a problem when this stone, for instance, is almost the only one in the longhouse. For there isn't any hard stone anywhere on the Tinjar River. And they have to go as far as 50 miles to get something hard enough to take steel. The plate has legs like a water turtle, and he can't resist finishing it off in a series of spiral patterns resembling the creepers in the jungle. Tamamuyut's nearing the end of his big job, and he's now chiseling away the figure of the small child that stands at its mother's feet. And this lovely figure of two monkeys climbing up a pole has been made by the old, almost blind artist.